Survivor Rights. It's us. Well, it's me again. Thank you tonight for joining us. Sorry we hopped on a little bit late, but we have some really, really important stuff to talk about. So we did not want to miss the opportunity to pick right up where we left off last week. And also don't want to miss the opportunity to start right out tonight after the vigil that we just had for our dear friend Katie about authority without transparency. Because honestly, at the end of the day, it is that problem, if you will, that leads to a lot of where we're at, to be honest. So I'm going to let you go because I know you have a lot to say on this subject.
Well, the whole authority without any transparency is kind of baked in with, well, back to William. This is a lot of his cultural background. Part of it was I think probably being out of that Mason culture affected him. His whole family was involved in that. His grandfather, his father, William himself was in the Mason Lodge. And I mean, that was pretty common in those days.
Right.
From a fraternity organizational standpoint, Scotland had a real strong Mason culture. So, the kind of the whole secrecy thing and the different levels. When William got into ministry, of course, as we heard, he went out with Faith Mission. If you were on Bridging the Gaps call there with Rhonda and the Faith Mission guys, and they really didn't give him there wasn't a lot of oversight. He came out of that Bible Institute, which is also influenced by Moody, but he came out of that, and then he was with Faith Mission, and we don't know. Can probably guess that he didn't tell him about his, call to service of putting his finger on that, verse and becoming the sharp teeth of the thrasher against the mountain of clericalism. I don't know. In today's world, that probably wouldn't be something you'd share in a job interview. I'm guessing that he probably didn't share that. Maybe he did. I don't know. But with Faith Mission, he was kind of, down there doing his thing. And as they said, the reports, at some point he stopped kind of sending those back. So William wasn't really big on he was called by God. He was God's messenger. So, accountability to somebody else wasn't part of the program.
Right.
William was William. And then as they kind of organized the church, with William being kind of the leader of these younger people, he was older than the rest of them, so they would have looked up to him. He was the one that kind of got him going out. He had to be pretty persuasive to get him to go out on faith lines there and to join him in that ministry. So the whole system was really never designed for accountability. There wasn't like there was a board overseeing things or anybody else really being accountable. At the end of the day, William was top dog. And, until they pulled the coup on him, I mean, he took input from, Edward and some of the others, and there would have been that aspect, but there really never was any structure to it. And we were taught, of course, it's spirit guided, so you don't need any of that.
Right.
And, of course, what we found out is the overseers in 1914, when the William's right-hand men really overthrew him, they removed William, and they didn't want any one person being over him. So they kind of became independent over geographical territories on the globes, only really accountable to each other. And that was pretty minimally accountable to each other. So they were kind of loose. Well, they were affiliated, but I mean, we have doctrinal differences. That happened. And around, I want to say it was late 20s, 28, about the time they got rid of Eddie Cooney. They kind of had a thing where if you were a worker and you transferred to another overseer's area, you had to kind of clear what you said doctrinally with them. You had to go along with the doctrine. So if you came from East Coast and went West Coast, you were going to have to communicate that. And that was worldwide. That was kind of an overseer's agreement. So, of course, East and West didn't probably move many workers back and forth. Those were kind of separate divisions. Right. Occasionally it would happen, but it's pretty rare.
And travel wasn't easy back then either. Compared
to now, but really by the time you got into the 20s and 30s, it's a train trip.
Hop
I
on a
mean, a
train,
couple
yeah.
of days maybe across the
Right,
U.S. So it's still pretty quick. Going to a different part of the world would have taken considerably longer before a
right,
flight. You would have been on a boat somewhere. So the whole overseer system was each kind of became accountable to themselves. And of course, there was no one overlooking it. I think it's 1911 letter that we have from William Irving, he's, overseeing and basically after telling, it seems to be to Jack Carroll. It's addressed to Jack. We assume that's to Jack Carroll. Not 100% sure, but it sure looks like it because he's talking about money management at the different conventions. That's the only letter that survived that they didn't manage to find and kill prior to 1914. And he's talking about the Weirs and how they were handling money. He gets after Willie Jamieson for his money handling and also the $20 jacket because apparently Willie liked a good jacket and William noticed that, and that wasn't quite so
right.
cool. And so he's giving instruction to Jack on that. So once they got rid of William, these guys kind of became the dude, and the senior workers could probably maybe influence them a little bit. I mean, there was kind of your staff is serves it. I mean, if you're too obnoxious, your staff's going to revolt against you. So you have to be a politician to manage that, but you can also exercise a lot of authority if you're the right person to do that. And Jack and George did, and those old boys, they knew how to exercise some authority and
Yeah.
how to use their words to the effects that they wanted. So as far as money goes, nope, goes to the overseer, and what happens there, nobody really knows. We're pretty sure that in today's world, they probably don't share that information because if you imagine if you were an overseer in an area that didn't have much money and you were an overseer sitting on millions and millions of dollars, it's not,
Right.
let's not go there.
Yeah.
We know that Washington State has sent a lot of people overseas over the years, and we know that a lot of times there's funding attached to those. So that's also a way to spread power. So if you can spread your doctrine, the West Coast doctrine of Jack Carroll, there was competition with the East Coast. So Jack was he liked to send workers all over. We got quite an influence in South America and the Pacific and, Japan, Korea, all of those
Yeah.
nations. But as far as the system goes, they're really not accountable. I mean, if an overseer goes too far, they can kind of talk to him, but you can see the letter that Dale Schultz wrote about Willis Prop and the excommunications, and basically rule one, the worker is right. When the rule, if he's wrong, see rule one. These are God's anointed, and we need to stand behind them, and to heck with everybody else. So transparency is pretty much zero. We don't know what the finances are, the way they hide them. Nobody knows. We know that there's probably a lot more money than they want to admit. And for a group that talks about homeless, penniless ministers,
Yeah.
yeah, what do you do with it? You can't buy, really expensive cars and houses and live in them. So there's
Right.
other ways, how you support the elderly workers when they get to a point. The overseer has control of that, and you're not in the good graces. You can end up like, well, Harold Bennett, he's in a pretty nice retirement home down in Oregon, and, he's getting the royal treatment. And then there's others that,
They're in a state
they got a
Medicaid
pedigree,
facility. Yep.
money might not be there. Well, we just don't have the funding. Well, who's going to say you don't? And, you can use it for, like Dean Brewer, what was he doing with the cash? There was
Right.
really no oversight, and you end
Right.
up with those situations.
Or accountability when you have an envelope full of $100 bills.
And
I mean,
everybody is trained not to question and not ask too many. And when
right.
they do question, as
Exactly.
Daryl and some of the others have been questioned in more recent years, last 3 years, they get real evasive, Oh,
Very.
we don't know how much we have. Oh, yeah, you do. Somebody does.
Oh, yeah. They know. Ted's saying the finances are as transparent as obsidian. Yes.
And strangely managed a lot like what the mob does. Unless we get
Yeah.
one of those money holders to start talking,
Yep.
you're not going to know until, because they probably know who some of the other money holders are.
Right.
I mean, there's some ideas of who's holding cash, but we just don't know what it is.
Right.
So as far as transparency goes, the history of that, really goes back to Wayam and Wayam not being under anybody's control, which Face Mission talked about,
Right.
went kind of rogue on them. And then, that Mason culture didn't, that seems to
Right.
be kind of the structure they liked. So, yeah.
But even then, it's top down. I mean, you and I you've been a business owner your adult life. I've been a business owner most of my life. There is a lot that goes into it besides just money management. It's how you treat people. It's how you treat your customers. There's so many factors to it. And you said it, they are politicians. I mean, I guess that's probably the best description of it, of how they navigate the ones with power. And I certainly discovered in my own life when I was raised in a family that had nothing and then found out that I was born into and was blood of a family that had lots of power. The rules were very different overnight for me. Very different overnight.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, the things I got away with after that were I would have never, ever in 100 million years even tried prior to. But anyway, so yes, so the anointing, have the call, so they are God anointed or whatever. And I guess can we have a dialogue around that and why people buy that? Because I guess, Jared and I have had a conversation about that really is pressure from the programming when you're born and raised into the church, that it's not, it might feel like a calling, but what it really is your entire structure telling you since you were 3 years old that you need to be a worker and we need more workers and that you're going to make a great worker. Like,
And,
where's the line on that?
well, and so originally, up to 1914, they knew and really 19, probably 10, 12, they knew who the person was that got this thing going. And it was based on Wayam and his revelation. They could point to the Matt 10 stuff, and they took the scripture without the context and interpreted it. And they truly were. A lot of those early ministers, as Faith Mission pointed out, were probably sincere.
Yeah.
Might be wrong, but they were
Right.
sincerely wrong. And they
Right.
knew they didn't have the money structure, so you could look to that and say, okay, so these guys are going on faith, and you're not talking educated people to educated people generally, so you kind of have some advantages. After 1914, though, since they didn't want to point to Wayam, because what do you do with that question of
Right.
how'd it get going? Well, we had a guy, we kind of made him a prophet, and
Right.
things didn't work out, so we kicked him out. That's pretty shaky foundation, and even basic people are going to have some questions. New people coming to it are going to
Right.
ask some very uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
And so they took the route, and the whole ministry was involved in this with a few exceptions, but they took the route of repositioning that so that you went from Prophet Wayam to the church in the home and the homeless ministry, and then they pointed that back as being from the beginnings.
Right.
And I have a quote, I have a picture of somebody's Bible here in Washington State that Jack Carroll wrote in, and this was 1960. And the exact phrase of this was, he said that Paul wrote 14 epistles. He wrote 11 to the saints and 3 to the ministers. Now, if you think about what Jack Carroll is doing there, he is saying, without actually saying, he's saying that Paul was writing to the saints, meaning the members of this church, and to the ministers of this church. So you can imagine, as during 1916 to the early 1920s, they excommunicated anybody that wasn't on the program. So the whole church kind of got
Behavior.
amnesia and
Yeah.
forgot about Wayam. And if you didn't, that's where the old fist came in, and they would excommunicate you. So you pretty quickly got the point that if you wanted to be part of the church, you weren't going to talk about Wayam. And the second part of it was anybody new coming into that church wasn't going to hear about it. They were going to hear about, Paul wrote to the ministers, and was writing to the saints. And then, of course, eventually George Gittins got a hold of it and some others and added some more details to the manufactured history. So when you talk authority, What they're telling you is they are from the beginning. This is from Paul. This is from Peter. This is from, all the original apostles. This is a direct descendant of it. This is the one true way and the one true ministry. So when it comes to control and trans authority and why you believe them, is if you truly believe, once they set that hook in there, then you're dealing with the original. So you're speaking against the workers, speaking against God.
Yeah.
These are
Oh,
God's
sure.
anointed. You are
Oh,
going against them. And Dan
yes.
Pierce took quite a poke at this, a
Oh,
couple of years ago, and it was good enough that it's worth repeating. And he said it
yeah.
starts with the declaration of being the one true way and the one true ministry. And he said once those are true in mind, then it is an entrapment by doctrine. And he said folks can't leave or they face eternal damnation. He said, now if you have a captive membership that cannot question the behavior of its leadership, ministry, and elders, then the leadership can abuse the church in multiple ways, and there is no recourse or face eternal damnation if they speak up and leave. And he said, now once you have that, corrupt behaviors are justified by corrupt doctrine, i.e., I can rape little kids and be in the clear as long as I pray earnestly each time. It's a self-perpetuating system. It's a self-perpetuating dig to the bottom of a cesspool that has no bottom. So basically, that's Dan Pierce's words. I reposted a version of that on CCF, and Whitney made me take out the cesspool part about it because she felt it was offensive at the time. I don't think she'd care now.
Right. Yeah.
But that was Dan's point is once they have that established,
Right.
then if you leave, if you question, if you leave, you're going to hell. So once the parameters are in place, that's where the authority gets. That's how they kept us there. They taught us early that if we didn't profess, we would be, by age 12.
Right.
Jesus was in the temple doing his Father's will, and that was kind of the cut
Yes.
point. And they made that pretty clear in a number of ways.
Yep.
So their authority was established, and then you have two tracks in the church. If you're a member of the church, you can either, be a good 2x2 and maybe be an elder or have a home for the workers to stay in, or you can take the next step and be the highest calling, the ministry itself. And there are so many different sermons of which the ministry is promoted as being above the church. So, there again, we go back to this faith mission video, and I strongly encourage people to watch Rhonda interviewing Faith
Yes.
Mission, because the faith mission does not start churches.
Right.
And so William Irving went from there. And the first couple of years, 1899 to kind of fall of 1902, they were really sending people back. Now, they were teaching a pretty harsh doctrine, but they were still not, your really choice if you wanted to join them was go ministry. That was, or, you didn't make the cut. And then they decided they added the church in the home. So once they added the church in the home, that gave a place for people that didn't make the highest spear or calling. Jack Kerouac called spear the highest spear. If you weren't called to the highest spear, if that wasn't your call, the least you could do was support the ministry and, be a member in the church in the home. So that's how they got where they're going. And so the ministry was put over the church. And that is a very, very different profile from where Faith Mission was going also.
Right.
And William had left a little bit before that, but they had kind of figured out that he was sending his own crew out under his own authority and not being part
Right.
of their group.
Totally get that. And I also think that that's where, when people, 2 points that I want to make. One is that if I ever do feel sorry for any of the workers, it's because they're young workers and they literally look right at you and say, but that's not how it started. They literally don't know. It's like you and I not training our frontline people,
Mm-hmm.
That's just absurd. You would never not do that. You would never, if you cared at all, I guess, is the point that I'm making about that. So I feel bad that so many of them are just stuck in that
Well, and
lack
there's a
of
lot of them
knowledge.
who are older now who,
Yeah.
who went in as young people thinking they were joining
Yes.
the one true ministry and the one true
Right.
church as they were taught by, the generation before them.
Hmm.
And, now what do you do? I mean, especially as you start getting into your 40s, 50s,
Yeah.
the earning years of your life are gone. Um,
Yeah.
you're probably not super happy where you're at, but it's all you know.
Yeah.
And, some of those, what do you do? And
Yeah.
there,
I do
there's an
have a lot of
entrapment going
compassion.
on in the ministry today.
Yes, I do still have a incredible amount of compassion for that group of them. Um,
I
with
don't
that said,
excuse them,
though,
but I have compassion for them because they
right.
are they're also entrapped by a system that George Walker and Jack Carroll sold.
Yeah.
And that early group of ministers, now they all knew, all 200 plus of them in 1907 stood up and, cheered on the living witness doctrine as they kicked John Long out.
Right.
The church knew, but after 1914, they really downplayed that. So even ministers that joined in the 20s, you know, you probably didn't talk about Wham, or you could get kicked out of the ministry. So their
Yeah.
companions weren't going to enlighten them.
Right. No, definitely not.
They probably
And
would
I
eventually.
yeah, I totally get that. So the other point that I wanted to make is that that's why now, whenever I talk to people, I always talk to them about separating the system, because what we're talking about is a system of control, a system
Yeah,
of authority, a system, separate the system from God, because you got to start there with your reprogramming. You have to realize that leaving meeting doesn't mean leaving God. It doesn't
no,
have to. That they're really, God is not in the system the way that they programmed us to think he is. He's
correct.
not. That is a totally man-made system that has no biblical authority, no biblical teeth whatsoever when it comes to salvation and how we deal with anything. Jason's saying it was so wonderful when I realized the workers had no authority over me. Jesus is the name above all names, and overseers are just men. Amen, Jason. Yes, my friend. Jason will be on Sunday. Yes. That is it. And I guess that, and the fear culture of all of that, that, oh my goodness, it was bad enough if you were seen in the makeup aisle as a professing woman at the grocery store. But if you were seen by a worker, like, now that is a whole nother level of shame. But yeah. So, okay. So authority without transparency. So that's where it's come from. That's the history of it. That's why they think that they can just take all the money, have no accountability, no structure, no nothing, and zero. Okay. Here's what I want to know. Why don't any of these people who are giving them all this money start saying, what are you doing with it? Like, if I saw the picture of the room that Dean Brewer was in from the police report. Maybe they just don't want to look at the police report. Maybe they truly don't know, which I think that the workers have done a good job of isolating information.
There's a certain amount of that. There's also, if you look at the wording of the way they word those sermons, they're pretty slick with sliding things in, and we all sat there and listened. It's kind of like the one
Yes.
making the rounds on, the 2x2 abuse forum from the Australian one that's
Yes.
being poked at right now, and you run that through ChatGDP, and it don't come up so hot. Um,
Nope.
but you're used to hearing that. There's a comfort
Yes.
in it, I think, and then there is probably a feeding of some people probably feed off the fact that they are exclusive. There
Mm-hmm.
is a certain
Oh, I
amount
know.
of humble pride in the fact that you have, you're the ones.
Yeah.
And the workers are going to pay probably for those estates that are really, really worthwhile. The workers are going to be spending a lot of time with those people.
Yeah.
They're going to be, they're going to be getting a lot of attention and love from the ministry.
Yes.
Much as people don't like to administer to do that, depending on the finances, there are those in the ministry that are going to pay close attention to it, and they are going to make sure that you get the love. Um,
Yes.
how that works going forward, you know, I think there's probably people that are elderly that have estates that if the ministry can convince them, or maybe they don't have heirs, or maybe they're mad at their heirs for leaving or whatever, you'll see money get transferred. Eventually this will run out because you've lost the youth
Yeah.
aren't there anymore.
Right.
That pool's getting pretty small. Of course, then again, the number of ministers going in is getting small. Um, yeah, boy, Jack Carroll started collecting money back in the 1930s. There's one of his, I think, 34 sermon. He talks about money and how they, if you give us the money, we'll make good use of it. And occasionally people give us estates. So he was, that was during the height of the Depression. They were probably a little short. It's 34, 35, 36, somewhere in there. He was preaching that. And there is a line in there specifically calling out estates donated to the ministry. So we know that by 1930, mid-1934, I want to say 34 on that, but it could be 35. We know that in that sermon, it's on Cherie's site, up there under Jack Carroll. If you dig around, you'll find it.
The power of suggestion. Age-old marketing. So that takes us into our next one, which is, it is, man, it is. Fear-based
You're buying
retention.
your way to heaven, but you could do one last good thing.
Right. You could just leave it all to us and we'll just pave the way. We'll pave the way. Let me tell you. Okay, fear-based retention. Let's move on to that because this one drives me insane because it has cost people literally their family, their community. They feel like their salvation. That's not true. Their identity, because they're out here saying, listening to people like us, I guess, but reading the Bible for themselves.
I mean,
like
honestly,
it's not. Yeah.
I was there when I hit the fall of 23, and realized what I had read and what it meant. I had a really tough time with that because we were drummed into us that our salvation was in this one true way, and if you left it, you were going to hell. You were apostate. There was all sorts of words used for that. Lost out, the great falling away, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But we were drummed in from that, from a young child, what would happen in all the vivid detail they could paint on Saturday night. Of what was going to happen if you did not. And, getting that out of your head, for me it was history. The history was really helpful along with all the stuff that was exposed. But the history of realizing that it was just, no different than Joseph Smith or some of the other ones who had revelations of one true ways, and you realized that ours was just another one of those. Once you lose that authority, then it's a different issue. But it's that connection of being the one true way, and if you leave it because it's the one true way, then the alternative is hell. I mean, that's
called fear-based retention. Okay, let's be honest. Very clearly, cult behavior. End of story. There's no nice way to say that's what they do. That's what they're.
And that's what
All of it.
exclusivity does. That is the result of exclusivity. When you're exclusive, that means that you are it and everybody else is not. So there's no real nice way to, and they stated that really clearly. 1907, I mean, they're getting up there saying, without the living witness, you're condemned. And the living witness being Wham or someone who heard it from Wham.
Okay, so while we're on this, I want to just talk for a second because obviously I have a really big thing on my mind, and that's the vigil that we just did. So I want to go back to the accountability piece for just a second. Do you have an explanation for how on earth they explain or justify covering up all this CSA that has been going on for decades and decades and keep those people in power? Cynthia posted today, I almost lost my brains today before this vigil because she posted and I texted her and she said, yep, that's true. How long these people knew about Ira before they put him into an overseer position. What in the world? Where do they get authority like that to do that when they know?
Well,
Zero accountability.
I mean, it goes way back. There again, a lot of this kind of, in my mind, and it's my opinion, that after 1914, as the overseers tightened control, it also opened the door during that time period of tightening control, removing any voice that would be dissentious to them. It created the need to have, because it's the one true way of the one true church based on the 2x2 ministry and church in the home, it needs to present itself as that. And so there is, tied with that, we have a problem. You buried Prophet Wham, which is a clear lie. They knew it. They deliberately did this. This was not accidental. This was a planned, premeditated, planned out campaign to remove Wham. Now, in that process, you also open the door for narcissistic behavior. You get somebody in power, they can, take it there. And then the need to maintain that image. So if you have a problem in the church and your whole structure is based on secrecy and keeping everybody in their place and trust to the overseer, then any problem in the church is not going to be dealt with openly, because that would interfere with the image and start people asking questions. So it's, in almost all cases, they covered up. There's a few cases where an overseer actually did the right thing, but in general, almost always, their tendency was to cover up, because these were God's servants. These were God's, they were spirit guided. And so all of a sudden, if they're not,
Yeah.
that throws shade on the whole system and starts these questions. So as you got into later years, and that system became more and more entrenched with each passing overseer and each new overseer, and the certain characters rose to the top on the next generations, you had a situation where the incentive was, like all churches, not like, we took it to extremes because the ministry lives in our home and they were the one true way and the one true church. But even regular churches, the institution becomes what they protect. Yeah. And, Diane Langsberg's book go into detail on this. You go into, the church called Tov goes into a ton of detail on this, of how this happens in an organization. And we took it and then put it on steroids because we're the one true way and the one true church. So they just buried this. And if somebody spoke up against them, you had the use of the whole church. You start a whisper campaign, and you make the person speaking up the bad person.
Yeah.
It's just, all of these
exactly
behaviors
what they
just
did.
get amplified in a closed system. And people are trapped, so they don't, if they believe that it's their only way, they'll
Yeah,
suffer with it.
trapped. You said it. You used the word, and I'm going to go with it. They are trapped, and it is so sad to me. So sad. It just literally, and then you add the fear-based retention onto it of just, just the eternal damnation. Like, I don't think about it very much because I've been out for so long, but when I read some of these letters, or I think, like, I read the letter from the overseer who literally asked the victim to forgive him and help him get back into a position because he was anointed, as you said, and we need ministers. It's like, are you seriously kidding me? You want her to help him get back to his position? Oh, Lord, have mercy.
Well, and even some of the people that I've talked to that have been out, that left, like in the 90s, or have been out for 20, 30 years, there's cases where they left and they just assumed they were going to hell. I mean, they
I hear it all the
literally,
time.
they could not take it where they were. They left. And they believed that their salvation was lost. Some lost an entire faith in Jesus because of that, and others just lost, just felt that they were condemned to hell because of but they couldn't be there, so it was worth the risk. And of course, when this all goes down, half of those people pop their heads up and go, "What the heck?" It wasn't just me.
Right. Well, and I think, it's like I say all the time, there is a reason they don't want you on the internet. There is, because you have intelligence, because you are a smart person, and it doesn't take a brain surgeon at all to start connecting these dots that literally are so absurd and rude and mean and harmful. And like, I mean, I could just go on and on. I can't find anything. Yes, there are good people in there.
Yeah.
There are. And there are good workers.
Yep.
But that, I always say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. However, we are each responsible for our own salvation. And if you are trapped in a situation like that, you need to start thinking about how you can separate God from this horrific system that has you trapped. That's all
Well,
I
and
got to say about
you
that.
noticed with that too that there's these sermons out there, and we're looking back at those sermons. I've read a lot of them, but like the one that's up there, that's current. That's from like
Yeah,
2005.
right.
That is current, and
Yeah,
everybody in that audience, all of the ministry and all of the church members would have sat there, listened to it, and not a single person felt that they had ability or voice to stand up and say, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! Wait a minute,
right,
you're doing what? You know,
right,
what are you talking about?
right.
Can you show us where that's at?" Nobody questioned them. They all sat silent. That whole convention is like a scripted show,
Sure is.
and you have your part to play, they have their part to play, and we're all going to say that we're edified and then go get stew. Um, you know, that's the way that system is set up. And so nobody sat there, and I know some of those workers who were there who were from out of area, and they sat there too, and not a
Yes,
single one of them stood up and
right,
said, guys, I think we're off here. You're
right.
driving a Rolls Royce, looking down at everybody. What kind of spiritual lesson is that, dude?
Exactly,
What's all
exactly.
this business about, these who have, these three ladies who are persecuting our church? That's not what's going on. They're just simply bringing to light what the victims are doing. Where,
Right.
so none of that happens because they're on that platform speaking. And even
Yeah,
their brothers and sisters who are sitting there don't feel that they have the ability to question. You
right.
know,
Oh, I have had so many people say to me, if I say Cynthia's name, it's like, that's conversation's over as far as they're concerned right there. We're not going to talk about it. It's like, and my name's right up there now, but what a shame. Like, because someone is intelligently and I don't even know. It drives me crazy. Janelle says it's not only bodies, minds, and health they're taking, it's souls. Absolutely, Janelle. And I'm not saying that people who are in the truth are going to hell, all of them, but what they're doing is turning people into monsters on the inside because we have to repress all of our emotion, all of our questioning, all of our human reasoning, like all the things that we were created to do and be, along with our free will. I mean, it just is putting somebody into a pressure cooker and thinking it's not going to go off someday. Like,
well, and that's not how Christ wants people to follow him. So as a
no,
Christian, I'm
no,
this really bothers me because people say, well, the
yes,
ministry has done good things. Well, that is, they have, yes, they have preached Christ to some people. And some people have gotten around all of the other stuff and probably have a relationship with him. But they've also done really horrible things to innocent people and destroyed faith that those people now, they can't trust anybody because in the name of God, these ministers committed horrendous crimes and the church sat by and was quiet about it. Now, there was a
correct.
time when probably a lot in the church didn't know, but that
Yeah,
time has really ended. And there are some
yes,
pockets out there where they've been able to keep this down and keep everybody off the internet, but there's a lot of people now who are aware.
yeah,
And, you have to look at that too. What's, being done in Christ's name. They're taking the name of Christ. These are people who have raised themselves up as teachers. They might think they were called, but what they have done in that name has hurt a lot of people and really damaged a lot of faith. And it's not exactly a faith based for a lot of people. There are some that heard love of
right,
God, heard grace, and they were able to filter out the other stuff. But a lot of us got the beat it into us. And
right.
that's not the relationship God wants. That's not biblical, that's not scriptural, and that
No,
is completely um, it's anti to Christ. And that's what
it
they're
is.
doing. and nobody wants to fess up because the system falls apart if the tactics change.
Right.
I mean, Sean said
Yeah,
that
but
basically it wouldn't be the same
here's
church if they made corrections.
I agree, but I also lay in bed at night and worry about all this, and I think to myself, there are churches on every freaking corner in every
Yeah,
town. Like, remake yourself, reframe it, rebrand. It's not that big of a deal. Just stop doing what you're doing
well,
because,
the ones who have control have spent
oh,
their
I know.
whole lives getting there, and they're not
I
wanting to give
totally
any of that up.
understand. I do.
They're
But
just
this is
old
where
men in
I'm,
suits all of a sudden, and nobody's in suits. They don't have any biblical training, so how would they even rebrand themselves? No one's going to listen to
they
them
would never make it on the
if they
outside.
weren't descended
Exactly.
from the original apostles. I mean,
Exactly. They have no way to make it on the outside because they are so uneducated and ignorant about life in general. On like so many of us were, we lived in a bubble. It was a bubble. And unless
yeah.
you were either a business owner or you're out or you're doing something and interacting with people that you really don't know because that's your whole life. Everything right there. But they are those few men, the trail of destruction and pain and suffering that they have left and literally now scoff at. I'm not going to lie to you, Brice. It turns me. I, I don't have any idea how anyone could call themselves a man of God and behave the way they do. I don't understand it.
So if you want to look to history and have fun with that, go look under Alfred McGowan and about 1955, 6, somewhere in there on Cherie's website under early ministers. And there's a letter in there that he wrote. He wrote multiple letters to a number of the overseers. Jack Carroll, George Walker got his attention, and some of the others. But his one to George Walker, there's a line in there, and he asked George Walker kind of this question. I'm sure George Walker round-filed this letter, but Alfred knew it, so he saved a copy. But Alfred asked him, oh, when you go to, we're old men, and he says, when you go to get ready to go to bed at night, do you think back over the years, and do you remember those who you excommunicated? And then he proceeds to tell a story of a man that was excommunicated right about the same time he was, and where they went in and they called him in, they excommunicated him, and the guy came out with his face as white as a sheet. He said he disappeared out of my life and your life, but do you remember that man? And so Alfred McGowan is writing this stuff in the 1950s to George Walker, and you can read it. And he's asking that question straight up in Alfred McGowan wording, which is really kind of interesting wording. He's Irish, and it's a little bit like reading C.S. Lewis in a way. So he's very interesting in his wording on that. But he's recalling to George Walker, and he's specifically calling out, do you remember these people as an old man? Do you look back at your life, and what do you see here? Do you see these people you've hurt? And of course, he didn't get any response, but he's still trying in the 50s. And Alfred's motive, I believe, was he was kind of hoping that maybe he could touch something in them that was still responsive to what he knew of them as young men. And of course, they didn't respond. But
So this, exactly what we're talking about, and then they wonder why everybody that leaves is angry. Oh, well, let's see. You trapped me my entire life. You hurt everybody that I know and love, including my own self. And you wonder why I'm mad? Come on. It, again, doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out. You don't get to treat people like that for decades. For decades. And turn them into shells of themselves with a loss of identity, don't even know what restaurant they want to go to for dinner because they were not trained to make a decision or to think for themselves or to even care about what they might want or think or need or could do with their life. Like,
yep. And the ministry, there's varying degrees of control because some were raised in environments where the parents were were not as bought in, or came from outside first gen instead of,
Yeah.
third or fourth gen, or didn't have a meeting in the home, or were, they didn't have quite the same contact points. But
Right.
there were a big chunk of us that got the high control. It's not,
Hmm.
people don't refer to it for high control for nothing.
Right.
And you read their words, and their words tell you who they are. It's
Right.
just once you take that history behind it and you understand that it's not from the shores of Galilee, then you can start to question it. And once you start understanding that, then it falls apart, and they know it. I mean,
Yep.
they've known it for a long time.
Well, Cherie's going to be on, as you and I know, 2 weeks from tonight, and we are going to have the conversation about the changing and evolving rules for women over the history of this church. So that history I am especially interested in.
Oh, you Jezebels wearing your earrings.
Oh, you have no idea. I can hardly. I mean, I am like, I
Oh,
got her email.
makeup on.
I literally jumped up and down. I was so excited. I was like, yes, yes, I want to talk about that, and yes, I
Ellen
want to have that
Denniswood's going to
conversation
get
with you.
get voted.
Oh, it is going to be a good time. Let me tell you what. Plus, I know she's witty and fun. So, okay. Next subject: shunning without calling it shunning, because they say they don't shun people. Bull.
Well, go back and look at Jack Carroll's 1920 sermon, and he talks about how to treat those who have left. And he was pretty straight up with that. So in the old days, they were straight up with shunning. Jack Carroll, I mean, I don't know how you could make it more plain without using the word shun. He told them not to, basically you were to cut them off.
Right.
And,
No breaking of bread.
no
No.
breaking of bread, the whole
Yeah,
9 yards.
I
And later
remember all
that got softened, and you can follow this through it. But the core concept remains, because if you leave, or you're dealing with people outside, they could contaminate you. So then the world becomes use the word
that.
the world. You can word those who left are bitter. They'll drag you out. And you can even look back, we can go back to 2000 and or 1999, 2000, and they're on 2x2 expressions, expressions 2x2,
Mhm.
the other site there. Abernathy, I think it is, and Sidney
Albert
Holt got
Abernathy. Hmm.
Sidney Holt got into it, and he was writing Sidney Holt, and basically Sidney Holt was saying, you can't have really fellowship with us. Or, there's a letter out there, Walter Pollack, I think, is the one that said that essentially, if you were dealing with the Six Cup Sermon, I think it was, he talks about if you were to go to another church, that you would not be in the same fellowship. You couldn't have fellowship. That would be a weakened state, and you would actually be condemning yourself. You would be, he had a word for it, but it was basically saying it. So they've preached this stuff for years in all sorts of different wording and different ways. If you're not part of the group, you can't be exclusive. So the whole point of it is, if you cannot be exclusive, if you're
Right.
exclusive, everyone else is out.
Right.
And so if you associate with those, we were taught as children not
Right.
to get too close to people outside of the church as
Yeah.
kids.
Oh yeah.
School friends, you didn't get real, there was kind of an acceptable line there, and not to take that
Mhm.
any further. Um,
Yep.
there was, you didn't want to associate with those people. You tried to associate, if you could, with those who were in, and that was your social circle. So it was discouraged because they had televisions. Oh
Yes.
my goodness, they might have television. You might watch something on television, and kids go to
Never
the
mind the
Sears
fact that
store
we
and they're
all
all
went to a
parked in
hotel to
front of the
watch the game.
television. I remember that, back when Sears had stores. Um, so there's this whole, we're in the conventions, the meetings, the activities. Sports were discouraged pretty strongly.
Yes.
There were different families had different rules, but the ministry
Yep.
spoke pretty strongly about sports. And well, if it was on a Wednesday night, then you were going to have to make a choice. And Eldon's got a whole thing on that. Go look at his 1982 letter to the young people. Um, dances in school. If you were,
Right.
even square dancing as a kid in elementary school, I had a note that excused me from square dancing in elementary school because dancing was a sin. And the workers made that really, really clear.
Oh,
Um, so, even those kind of activities, which if you were a little ADHD and a little odd in those days, well, that made you even more odd.
yeah.
That, yeah, till school bowling, let's get into that. But, um, you know, the two by two didn't, the isolation and separation, you show up at school and, the kids are playing with these R2D2, little Star
Right.
Wars figures as a kid, and you don't know anything about it. Well,
Yeah.
already your social circle's going a different direction. So we
Yes.
were socially isolated in a lot of
You would
ways.
have loved R2D2. Come on.
Huh?
You would have loved R2D2.
Yeah, so you show up and they're talking about Star Wars. You don't even know what this is about
Yeah.
because every other kid in school knows, but
Right.
you don't.
Right.
Um,
Well,
you know,
Mardell is saying that you could have gotten an earring too. You still can.
well, I know about Star Wars now. We've been messing up. By the time you got in teenage years, VCRs were out, and you know, yeah, if you had a friend, you could
Yes.
have probably, yeah, you got a little better. Of course, that was old stuff to them, so you know.
Right.
Um, but really, the whole social isolation plays into that shunning. So you're part of this
Yeah.
group, and you associate with this group, and depending on where you're at and where, larger cities, it's maybe a little hard, but especially as you get in the
Mhm.
more rural areas, that group gets really tight.
Yep.
And if you step away from that, you lose it.
Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, it's also your family and, all of that. I will say this, the other thing, since Mardell just said that about the earring. Last night, you know what she said to me? We finally have the community that we thought we had on the inside. I'm like, boom, girl. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And I love it.
Just get Mardell to talk. She's hilarious.
She is. Comedy show with Mardell coming up. Yeah, wild. Darla's saying she loves square dancing. Oh, you got to. You lived on the West Coast, Darla, man. There was no square dancing where I was. We were not allowed to have primary school birthday parties without school friends at home.
Yep.
Hmm.
There
Yeah.
was it was preached pretty much that you stayed in the rules. Now, not all parents did
Yes.
that, so some people's experiences were a little different.
Right.
And if you had close family, a lot of close family that wasn't part of the church, you may have gotten a different exposure. But for those of us who were thoroughly born and raised on both sides, and were
Yes.
in, you generally got a pretty toasty doctrine, it was pretty
Yes.
controlled. And,
Yeah.
your actions, there was a standard to be met and they made sure you knew the standard. And you really think about it. If you're a young worker and you're looking for a subject to speak on, the wisdom of Jack Carroll or Eldon Tenniswood, and Eldon published these letters. I mean, he made sure they got out. If you're a young worker, you can't go wrong getting up on the platform and speaking Eldon's words or Howard Mooney's words or
Yeah.
Jack Carroll's words. I mean,
Right.
and if they're still alive, they're going to, you probably get extra bonus points for it.
Straight to that
Um,
narcissistic behavior.
I mean, I heard Jack Carroll's 1951, Two Fundamentals sermon, word for word at Olympia in the 80s, and I forget which worker spoke, if it was Eldon or might have been Everett Swanson. It was one of the older brothers at the time. Got up and literally read that sermon word for word at Olympia convention. So they were
Wow.
just, they were repeating those words. I didn't even know it was Jack Carroll's sermon until like years later when someone gave me a copy of it, and it's like, oh, that wasn't there. That was actually somebody else's because I probably had zoned out the first part of it. And, all of a sudden was like, ooh, that's just, start paying attention. I was probably 12 or
Well,
13 years old.
Yeah, no kidding. I think one of the other things that has really become real to me is how shallow not only the relationships were that we thought were deeper, so that's one point, but also even our relationship with Christ. Like it just wasn't there. It was the relationship with the workers and what you did and went to meeting. It was such a tradition. And when we talk about edifying, again, I think it's the programming because it's not backed by scripture. When you do start asking them questions like we're having this conversation with you, like I would do you know what I would give to get you and Ray Hoffman in a room? It's
You
just
know, they're
listen. I
so
just want to
slick.
sit.
They're
I
so
just want to listen to
slick.
you.
You would have to define what a word means before you even said it, because the words that they use are not, they mean something entirely different until you start
Yes,
defining
but
those words. Let's get Doyle Wheeler in there so that he can, poke around at it, or Dan Pierce, or some of the others, Dave Ben, or any one of, there's a whole slew of, Brad Gray,
there
whatever.
is. You
Um,
guys got it
there's
going
there's a
on,
whole
man.
group that could probably, once you start to understand that, though, when they say that word, it doesn't mean the same thing to you. When you say the
Right.
world, um,
Yes,
in the two by twos, that's a very different word than in
it
other
is. Well,
churches.
yes. So even on this show, I posted it last week and I said they. Somebody even asked me, who is they? Yeah. Two by two speak, let me tell you. Yeah. Wild. We are getting down on time, so I don't want to start another subject because the next subject that I want to talk to you about is the marriage divorce subject. So we're going to have to save that for another time. But we did not even talk about the faith mission. So can we talk about that really, really
Yeah,
quickly?
let's talk about Faith Mission.
Because
That was
man, that
really
was such a good
fascinating.
show. I want to thank Rhonda again and Mardell, all of you, whoever put all that together. I listened to it live. I know you listened to the replay, and oh my goodness, talk about just like doing revivals and sending people to Jesus and then go to whatever church you want. The only important thing is that you love Jesus and love one another.
Yeah, the question I would have loved to have asked them, though, would have been, way back when that thing started in 1895 or so. It would have been really interesting because they mentioned Moody, and it would have been really interesting to see if their opinion or how they viewed scripture from a standpoint of like bare scripture or sola scripture, or what context or historical context they found acceptable or not acceptable, and what guardrails they kind of had in interpretation. My suspicion is, based on Wayham, and there again, I have not studied this. Cherie probably knows way
Right.
more about this than I do, and Faith Mission probably knows a whole lot more. But just where exactly do they draw that line? Because Wayham basically got the idea of the whole John Darby Nelson, and that goes back one step further, before the Plymouth Brethren, but the idea of reading scripture and being able to interpret it on one's own without the historical or cultural context.
Mhm.
And that's where we get so far down the road of trouble. I think they probably leaned that direction, but Wayham just took that and ran with it. So that would have been an interesting question to ask him. I would have been really curious to see what they, how they answered that. But yeah, the whole idea, they have the records. They know when Wayham joined their group. They know what he sent in those bright words, the
Mhm.
newsletter. They noticed when he went rogue. It took them a little bit because it's, you know, Pilgrim Wayham wasn't sending in his reports,
Right.
because Pilgrim Wayham had already went a new direction,
Yes.
and was not under their control anymore. And it took him a while to realize that. Um, my guess is he probably wasn't super committed to getting those reports to begin with. But the whole idea, if you look at Faith Mission now, where Rhonda talked to him, and she's like, "Well, where do you stay?" They have houses. They
Yeah.
have properties that the Faith Mission has bought for their
Mhm.
pilgrims. Back in the old days, I think they gave them enough of a stipend to live like they could, a rooming house or a boarding house or some, really, it was like just
Right.
one step above being on the streets. But there was enough money, that they were getting a small stipend,
Yeah.
from the or any extras that they got went back up to Faith Mission. But today, you notice how they might stay with a pastor if they're in an area doing something, or
Mhm.
somebody that there's a trust there. But the same thing, they're not living with their people. And they're in those, properties or running camps or doing other things to spread the gospel. I think they've got, I thought I saw a picture one time of a bus or some trailer unit that they had that they were running around with too, like a tour bus type thing that Faith Mission had. So they have a variety of things where they're running revivals essentially and pointing to the churches. They're not planting churches. That's a huge separation that Wham in 1903 made is he suddenly, and the churches were very definitely under the ministry. That's their whole idea of what a first century church looked like, and elders is not anywhere close to accurate. That's an imagination of what they interpreted reading Acts got them. People didn't show up with their little Bibles and hymn books and sit in a circle and sing, and that's not what happened in first century. They didn't have that. It would have been a very different experience.
I do very quickly. I know we are out of time, but I'm going to ask you this question anyway. What is your opinion on why they just cannot evolve at all? Like 2x2 specific. Why can't the workers evolve? Why can't they learn this information or even and by that I'm just saying, okay, so you don't want to change your ways. Could you at least get educated about trauma informed or how to what abuse does and trauma does to people?
On the shores of Galilee, it is unchanged.
But still, totally,
Let's go to our hymn book and sing "Unchanging the Way Remains."
It drives me wild. I don't understand. Okay, so we now have the internet. We now AI. We have all this stuff out there, right? Tools. We have the whole world is changing. And I get that it's, if you're from the purity culture and you're into that Amish Mennonite, that culture of simplicity and all that, I'm here to tell you it's not simple. It is horrifically painful to endure, especially as a woman. So why can't they just evolve a little bit?
Because as soon as they start evolving, as soon as they openly acknowledge evolving, that would open the door to other changes. So they do evolve and change. There has been rules. There's been some of those subtle rules that, all the workers run around with computers and, cell phones. Which, if you go back to the early days was a horrible sin. That was, they've evolved in that method, but they don't come out and say, we've had a rethink on this. Nobody ever has a rethink. Nobody ever questions it. There might be, they did it, black stockings were a thing, and then, we kind of moved on, and, red clothing was, you were a prostitute, and we moved on from that, and so they do culturally change. After Dean Brewer, we noticed a whole lot more. I noticed in the area, there were certain women that suddenly felt a lot more free to paint their nails and, wear a little makeup because, really, come on, guys, you're doing this. And one does it, and of course the next one looks over and says, "Yeah, sure." Even the guys kind of notice. For a woman, man. Generally on that, we're not paying that much attention to it, but there's others that do pay really close attention. So there is some change, but they don't want to ever admit it. And from a doctrinal standpoint, they cannot admit change because that would mean that Jack Carroll might have been wrong. That would mean that George Walker would be wrong. And then, of course, that lands back at Wham, but they don't want to talk about him. So you have to look back to Jack Carroll. And if Jack Carroll wasn't spirit guided, if he was wrong on this and he says the spirit guided him in those words, then that means what else was the spirit not guiding Jack Carroll in? I mean, just look at Jack Carroll's 1942 letter on, appropriate marriage and ceremony, where he talks about the marriage ceremony should not be this fun time. This is a serious thing. And, he has this whole thing on marriage ceremony, and then go read about Jesus, making water into wine for a marriage ceremony. I mean, he's helping the party along, and Jack Carroll's over here shutting it down, and, just really laying into people about, go to the justice of the peace and get married. It's not a celebration. Funerals are celebrations, but, marriages are, whatever.
Ridiculous. You know, I used to for a long time before I got back to doing what I'm doing now. I, for years, always said when people would ask me about how I was raised or whatever, I'm like, oh, I was raised in a church. And if it was fun, we didn't get to do it. So you isn't boring. You don't want to know nothing about it. If it was fun, the answer was no. And that's just how I
If
left
you
it. Like,
ask, the answer is no.
that was my description of it. Yep. Okay. Do you guys have any questions out there? Because otherwise, we're going to wrap this up. Susan Jones is saying, I really enjoyed listening to the two faith mission people, that interview. She thought they had a lot more together than the 2x2 fellowship. Well, yeah, because they're an actual organization. They have a few rules. They have some structure. They have accountability built
They have
in.
a board
They
that
have
they're
transparency
responsible
built
to
in.
each country.
Yes.
Board that they are accountable to and responsible to. There's
Yes.
financial transparency. If somebody's off here preaching weird stuff, the board's going to be all over them. And along with the
Yes.
other ministers are going to be all over them because they're not under the control of one dude up at the top.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, that's the other thing I'm saying. When I listened to that, I literally I laid awake half that night, and I used to be a really good sleeper till I started doing this again. Here's what I'm gonna say. Seriously, I have to work really, really hard outside these days so that I sleep like a baby. Um, the if the workers just implemented something like that, like just some kind of oversight or some transparency or some accountability or anything, but no. I hear what you say. That's just gonna, they're not. But I agree with you, Susan. That was a great, great show. Leanne saying, even though they might be accessing porn on their devices, yeah, we shouldn't have a TV. Yeah, we all know about that. Mm-hmm. We need to have a class on teaching people how to go on their routers of their home and look up search history. Okay, it's not that difficult, people. Seriously, if you're going to still have workers in your home, you better have some safeguards or some
Or
adult.
just make them use their own cell plan.
Don't give them the password to your Wi-Fi, because if they're looking at pedophile
That can
porn,
blow
it's
back
going to
on
be
you.
to your, yes,
I mean, they're going to
your
come looking at
GSM
where that
number.
router's located at.
Exactly. Wait till that starts happening.
That's happened.
Oh, I know it has. But we're going to sweep that right under the rug, aren't we? Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I'm exhausted for today. It has been a very, actually, a good day on the fact that we're having these conversations. We're building relationships with one another on the outside. We're speaking truth, shining light. All that is good. So I can't say that it's bad. It's frustrating. It's exhausting. It makes me want to vomit. But it's good
Yep.
because here we are, so many of us moving on.
Little by little.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you for hopping on. He wasn't super sure we were going to be on tonight, so thank you for just punting and going with it. Is there anything else you want to say? Because I always give last word. Last word goes to you, and I always want to thank you, and I got to get you back on the calendar, so if you'd hang on here, because...
Well, if you've got Cherie on coming up, talking about rules and 2x2 and women, I strongly would encourage anybody to tune into that one, because
Yep.
she knows where all the good stuff is and all the quotes and who said what and how it got there, and her own personal experiences with that, which you can see on 2x2 expressions 2x2. She's got her own story up there, and that's actually worth interesting reading because you know, she had to go through her own realization of that, and she's the one that's done really probably the most in-depth research on that subject, particularly on everything else, because she went down that road. But I mean, that's where you really want to find out where that came from. I mean, I'm sure she's got a few words on that.
Oh. My list of questions is going to be way too long for 1 hour. I don't know we might have a special show. I don't know. All right. Well, it is time for me to go have a glass of wine after the day that we've had. In my whole heart, I just want to say thank you to everybody for, showing up for these shows and showing up for one another. Like literally, I was sitting on my swing yesterday afternoon and I just had this thought come in my brain and I went back and counted. I had 13 people ask me in the last 24 hours before that if there was anything we could do or that they could do for Katie. And when I sat down on my swing and I just thought, yeah, Survivor Rites. We started as a vigil for the Leslie White's to be able to have a vigil at the time of his funeral. So I was like, yep, vigil it is. And less than 24 hours later, look what we were able to pull together. So I just want to thank everybody for caring so much and having such huge hearts. So, and thank you, Brice. It is always a pleasure. I always look forward to talking to you. And I will have a great night, everybody. Sunday's show this week is 1 hour later. It's Memorial Weekend, so we're doing it 1 hour later. And also, it's going to be a special connection show because it's going to be about connecting the dots on those maps with my friend Jason. I don't know if you're still out there, Jason, but him and Pam Walton, who keeps all these lists. So you are not going to want to miss this show. If you miss the show, you're definitely going to want to watch the replay because man, oh man. When he showed it to me, have you seen it, Brice? How he does it?
Oh, he's been doing a fantastic. Pam, of course, and then Jason coming along and starting to put that in a graphic. It's pretty amazing. And you think about what the cost of each one of those flights is.
The combination of those two.
Where?
Oh, let me tell you.
At the airport and fly on Faith Lines.
Yeah, right. Oh, you got to check your bags. You're going to have meal. You're going to all that. Oh, you want to sign
shut down now.
Oh, thanks everybody. Have a good night.